In my very first year as a young teacher, I encountered a young man who almost led me to quit. I'm glad that I chose not to, but I came very close throughout that year. In fact, there were days when I would be driving to work and I'd look out the window of my car on very wet, very miserable days and see people working along the side of the road trying to stay dry and warm, and I would envy them. I would wish that I could be one of them so that I wouldn't have to go to my classroom. The reason why I didn't enjoy that first year was because of one student. The class that I was teaching was in many ways a wonderful class. There were some brilliant kids in that group, some wonderful, wonderful students who cared about the right things and who worked hard and who every single day did whatever they could to be successful. I enjoyed them and they enjoyed me. But there was one boy in the class, for reasons that are too difficult to explain, who came to school on the first day with an attitude of belligerence and rebellion. He did not want to be at school. He did not want to be in my class. He constantly fought me on every point. He was both overtly and covertly rebelling against me every single day. And you know, I've got to be quite honest with you. I did not handle him well. I was young and I was inexperienced. I had an attitude of, you know, if I'm nice to them, they'll be nice to me. Well, it seemed to work with a lot of the kids in the class, but it sure didn't work with him. His attitude was, if you're nice to me, I'll take advantage of you. And he did. Unfortunately, his family was also struggling with him, and they didn't have any answers for me when I sat down in frustration and said, what can we do? And then on top of that, I increasingly throughout the year felt more and more discouraged. In fact, I have to honestly say, I would come to school on Mondays hoping that his family would have moved over the weekend. But not only did they not move that year, but he never missed a day of school. He was there every single day, challenging my authority in the classroom, challenging me as a teacher, and more than that, challenging my sense of value as a person, because I was failing with him, and failure with that student clouded all the success that I had with the others. I don't know if I'm speaking to anybody that's having that experience this year or remembers having that experience in some year, but I want to encourage you today to think about one thing. What is your goal? What is your goal every day in your classroom in the area of the way you manage your students? You see, that first year that I was at the school, honestly, my goal was control. I just wanted to control that class so they were quiet when I wanted them to be, so they learned what they needed to learn, and so that I could feel good about myself as a teacher and as a person. And that young man that I could not control, that I was a failure with, made me feel like a failure as a person. And the reality was, most of the time the class was pretty quiet and pretty orderly and pretty focused. But I was always waiting for that next moment where he would challenge me, and usually in some way, subtly or overtly, win. I don't believe control is the goal of management. It's certainly important, because if you don't have control over your class, there's no hope of progress with your kids. But I honestly believe the number one goal of classroom management is to work with students in such a way that they feel valued, whether they obey you or not. I certainly believe that if someone is being difficult and disruptive and they're sabotaging the teaching environment, you need to deal with that. Maybe eliminate them from the room for a while. Have conferences with the parents. Talk to the administrator. I did all those things with this young man. None of them worked. But the one thing that I didn't do is I didn't look at him as an individual that was valuable whether he obeyed me or not. I have to honestly say, I really disliked him, and he knew it, and that made him more belligerent as the year went on, more difficult. I really believe that a Kingdom First school is a school that features individuals, teachers, who are focused on valuing every child. Certainly not allowing them to do whatever they want, disciplining them in a fair and friendly and consistent way, but doing it because they want these individuals to rise up and be all that God can enable them to be. And I believe that a Kingdom First teacher, when that individual, that teacher has a very difficult kid in the class, works really, really hard with that individual throughout the year. The one thing I maybe didn't do enough of that year is pray for this young man. I pray for him now, even now, years later. But I didn't pray for him that often because I just saw him as somebody who had no value. That's shameful for me to admit, but it's true. And I believe that an effective teacher will pray their way into a state of mind that will enable them to be effective with a student. 4 years ago, when I was a principal, I had a student in my school who in many ways is very similar to this young man that I had in my very first year. He was difficult, he was defiant, he didn't do what I asked him to do. But you know, this time around, I did not behave in the same way. This time around, I prayed for him every day. This time around, I listened to him more carefully. I disciplined in a more consistent and, I think, somewhat effective way. And I never allowed his behavior to define him. I allowed God to define him. And you know what? We ended up having a great year together. Well, at the end of the year, he was one of my favorite kids. And when I see him in the community today, he still seeks me out. And we always have great conversations. Honestly, that young man didn't change in the course of the year. He struggled all year with his behavior. But one thing that he said to me when he left the school at the end of the year is, "Thanks for caring, Mr. Hills." And you know, if every kid that you teach this year can be convinced that you care about them, then you've done something really astonishing and amazing and lifelong transformational for them.